When a poor soul, when a person experiences a traumatic childhood, and I'm not talking about one event, I'm talking about years and years and years of emotional abuse. What is their hope for the future? Or will their past simply cling to them and haunt them till the end of their days? Well, and what has that got to do with the Philippines? Well, tubers, Tibets, and crazy people, I'm going to introduce you to my new friend, Alex, and he's going to show you or explain to you what it was like for him growing up and how he feels the Philippines just might be the tonic to cure his ills. All right, here comes my little video with Alex. Okay, so Alex, you told me earlier that your mother committed suicide at the age of 8 when you were 8. Was that your fault? Oh, we can't put that in this video. Okay, like I said in the introduction, boys and girls, I'm here with my friend Alex. Alex and I, even though we have a real wide gap in age, I am more than twice his age, we have a lot of similarities. And we got to having a real man-to-man talk the other day, and we were discussing our childhoods. And even though we are light years apart in age, some things never change. And that was the dynamics of our childhoods, which weren't the most, I don't know, they weren't the most, what would be the word, Alex?
Positive. They weren't the most positive.
All right. So let's get into it with you. And we want to direct this towards people that may have had similar experiences and are possibly feeling the same way that you are, or I was, and on how you cope and deal and what mechanisms you put into place for coping and dealing with it. So let's get into your mom and your ethnicity.
Got it. Yeah, my mother was half Japanese, half white.
Father?
And my father, he was an immigrant from southern India.
So he's pure-blooded Indian, and she is half Japanese.
That's right.
And he was your biological father.
That's right. He was my biological father.
What was the dynamics with your father?
Yeah, so my father essentially, he came to the United States. He was married with 5 children. And he was a medical doctor in India, but he could not pass the medical examinations. And so he turned to crime. He ultimately engaged in a business that catered to men looking for a good time.
So he opened up a massage parlor.
A massage parlor. He opened
and
up
what
a
state
massage.
was this in?
And this was in my hometown of Nashville, Tennessee.
Okay. So for a good time, folks, remember, go to Nashville, Tennessee. You don't have to come all the way to Asia, just go to Nashville. But he had a family that wasn't your family.
No.
Okay, so he was really your mother. We discussed this. I want to make sure this was okay to verbalize. Your mother was his mistress.
Essentially, yes. Now, she was not engaged in that business. She was actually a nurse. An RN, a registered nurse, but they met through the sort of medical industry, the conferences and that kind of thing, and that's how I came along.
Okay, and so what was the dynamics between your mother and your biological father? Were they involved in your life a lot, or how did that work?
Not really.
Okay.
Not really. He had his own family. He was also trying to make money. She would try to take him to court for child support. He didn't have money to support his own family, much less his second family. And for her, she was working 2 jobs. So she worked as an accountant during the week and as a nurse on the weekend. You could imagine working 7 days a week. That doesn't really leave any time for childcare.
So after you were born, and reality set in, their relationship went from having an affair to contention.
Absolutely.
Okay. And you were how old at this time? You were an infant. You were 3 years
yeah,
old,
so
2 years old.
I was, I was an infant. I had no idea what was going on, and then things progressed until I was right after my 8th birthday. My mother ultimately took her own life.
So at the age of 8, your mother took her life.
Yes, she took her own life.
And between your father and your mother committing suicide, did she have other boyfriends? Were there other men injected into your life?
Yes, she had an ex-husband that I met. She had a boyfriend that she dated from when I was 2 to 3. Then she had a different boyfriend. Then she had these friends. She had quite a few boyfriends throughout the time span from me being born until her taking her own life.
Okay. And the reason for her taking her own life, did you ever come to any kind of resolution as to why she did that?
Yes, I think that she had her own history of neglect as a child. Your audience is probably acutely aware of the Vietnam War. My grandfather, her father, served in that for her first 2 years of life. So he wasn't present at all. She was essentially raised in a single mother scenario. Now my grandparents were married, but he had to go serve the country. He couldn't be present because they needed money, and he came from a small town in Idaho where there wasn't a lot of opportunity.
Okay. So at the age of 8, here you are, your biological father is no longer in the picture. You never really had a male figure other than these men that were coming through randomly. And you told me that when she was together with them, when you were small, they would set you out in the hallway. And
yeah, I mean, I think that, part of that story too is that she, through her nursing became familiar with various prescriptions, right? Prescription medication. And she would take these medications to attempt to feel stable or to feel normal. And like a lot of medications, they wear off. And so you take more. And they wear off and you take more. And eventually they become ineffective. And now you're taking them to feel normal. And then you take them to feel not normal, but at least less bad. And so it's just this vicious cycle where her mental health continued to decline. The people around her didn't take it seriously, didn't want to hear about it, and ultimately didn't have a solution anyway.
Okay, so let's get into Alex. We know about the parents, we know about mom. I know that once she was no longer of this planet, that you went to go live with her mother.
That's right,
correct?
My grandmother from Japan.
Okay. And what was the dynamics like with that? Was she real strict? Was she easygoing? Was she fun? Was she what?
Well, when she had a boyfriend, my grandmother, after my grandfather passed, he passed when I was 3. That's a whole other story. Maybe we'll get into it a later time. But when she had a boyfriend, then things were okay. Her attention was off me. He supplied her with, a nice lifestyle. He had been a very successful academic and a professor, made some great investments, and that was good. And then one day, he had basically developed prostate cancer. And so he was attempting to solve this in the way that he knew how, through the medical community, and he met a younger woman. And this younger woman was able to help him to better understand treatment protocols, but my grandmother accused him of cheating. Now, in my personal opinion, he was not that kind of guy. He was just a very stable, down-to-earth guy, not that kind of guy. I understand there are guys that cheat, obviously, right? But but it's not every guy. And this guy was just such a, I don't like to use the word square or nerd, but he just wasn't that kind of guy. He's just literally trying to survive. But she accused him of seeing this other woman, so she decided to leave him. That's when all of her pent-up frustration at the way her life didn't turn out the way she wanted it to was directed at me. And so she became extremely strict, extremely controlling. I didn't learn how to drive until a few weeks away from my 18th birthday. I wasn't allowed to go out except for maybe Friday night until 10 p.m. So, up until that point, I had some opportunities to socialize, to learn communication skills, to connect with others. But after that point, when I was 15, when she left him, I was on lockdown until I was 18. She got me on probation for arguing with her. I didn't curse at her. I didn't hit her. I didn't do anything that would be abnormal for any teenager. For those of you who have raised teenagers or been teenagers yourself, you know teenagers could be a handful, but it's not often that they're going into the realm of needing to be locked down, right? I had perfect attendance at school, didn't have the best grades, but they were passing, you know, for the most part. And so our relationship was very contentious up until I was 18, and then she threw me out at 18 because she could no longer control me.
All right, what I want to know now is I want to do a deep dive into the childhood part of Alex. We're familiar now with what you came from and the players involved. What were your feelings? I mean, I can only imagine that you're going to school. I imagine when you're a little kid, nothing really matters. You're not self-aware enough, or you're only self-aware is probably a better way of putting it. You're not really concerned with what others think or any of that kind of stuff. But as you progress, you become 8, 9, 10, middle school era. Did you start to feel different? Did you start to feel, were you observing other kids who had a much more, what we call a normal upbringing? And what kind of emotions did that invoke in you?
Absolutely. That's a great question. You know, I think that at a certain age, it was probably around the time I started going through puberty, where I realized that our circumstance was atypical. A lot of people feel like their circumstances are atypical. I felt like an alien. I mean, I felt like we had come from outer space, and that, you know, we just, I don't know. It's difficult to put into words.
Were you, you mentioned to me that we were talking earlier that you felt like you were invisible?
I felt like I was invisible. I felt like, you know, I would see other kids getting to participate in, say, select soccer or developing some kind of talent. And it felt like a lot of the times we would try to mimic that, like for a sense of normalcy, but just an utter fail. Because there was just this lack of understanding, it was always through the lens of competition, not learn this for the sake of learning, don't do this for the sake of doing it or joy, but do it because this other kid's doing it, and if you get good, you're going to beat that other kid. This Japanese competition mindset that really takes the fun out of a lot of these childhood endeavors, right? Things that help kids self-actualize, that helps kids to get to know other kids, to figure out the things that they're good at, the things that they're not good at. I just felt like I wasn't good at anything because we'd try to do something and I just wasn't passionate. I'm still in this confusion of why do all these other kids have families and we've got this cobbled together thing that's just not really the same thing.
All right, so we've established that by your background and history, family history, you were feeling when you hit puberty, which is a real sensitive part of life, you were feeling invisible, you were feeling confused. Were you feeling envious at all?
Yeah, and you know, I didn't feel envious of the other kids. I would feel envious of the dogs of the family on TV. You know, we'd turn on the TV and there'd be a family there and I'd see that dog and I'm like, wow, that dog is well fed, and man, that dog gets a lot of pets, and that dog really seems to get a lot of attention. And so I felt jealous, and even to some extent, the dogs of friends' families, right? The dogs of friends' families, they didn't get mistreated. They didn't have anger taken out on them. They were seen as these pure beings, you know, in the way that I think children are supposed to be treated, and to some extent incapable of serious wrongdoing. Now, yes, I know kids act up and you got to discipline, you got to set boundaries, but not this scapegoat that you just take your frustration out on all the time.
And that's what you experienced. I suffered from, for many, many years, I won't get into my background right here, right now, but I suffered from a lot of rumination, and I carried that with me well into my young adulthood. Did you do that also? Was that part of your experience?
Absolutely, and I still struggle with it to this day.
That was my next question. Of all the things that you struggled with, which ones today, at the age of 31, do you still carry with you that you've yet to eject?
I struggle with rumination because I was often told as a kid, you're so smart. I was in elementary school, the top math student. I was reading at a college level when I was in third, fourth grade around the time my mom passed. And I was always taught, you're going somewhere. Like teachers would tell my grandma, this is the smartest kid that we've ever taught. And so when I got to adulthood and I had no male mentorship, I had no guidance, I think that older men teach younger men about their agency, about their ability to affect change in the world. When I didn't have that, I was just directionless, like a rudderless ship for years and years and years. And I always wondered, why are all these people having this success in their life? Why are their fathers teaching about their business? Why are they, settling down with their sweetheart? Why do I struggle to maintain healthy relationships? Why don't I know what that looks like? And I still struggle with that to this day, where I often wonder, what could have been? What could my life be like if I had a more stable upbringing? What if I had better examples of adults in my life to emulate? Not to copy them word for word, but to know, hey, life is about searching. Don't just feel like your life is over as a young 20-something, which is the way I felt. I felt like, wow, I can relate a lot to guys like Paul who have been through all of these struggles in ways that I can't relate to my peers. I mean, even today, many of my peers still have their parents. Some still have their grandparents. They've got holidays together as a family. I've spent almost every single adult Christmas by myself.
So do you struggle today with loneliness and rumination? Is it as intense as it was, say, 10 years ago?
In some ways, it's more intense.
Wow.
In some ways, it's more intense than it was 10 years ago, because 10 years ago, I wasn't aware of how these things infected me. I was just this machine, work, 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 work. Don't think about this stuff. Work on your business, hustle, make a dollar. And in the last 10 years, I've gotten into somewhat of what I call a negative effect loop. Now, I've broken out of that more recently. But there's a situation a lot of guys get into where they have some negative experiences, they feed into other negative experiences, and they feel like they're stuck in this cycle where one negative event feeds into another. You split up with your girlfriend, you lose your job. You lose your job, now you're worried about money. You're worried about money, you're not worried about your health. And I got into this cycle. Now, I've more recently broken out of it through seeing guys like you build a beautiful life for yourself. But it took a long time for me to feel like I was starting to steer the ship in the right direction. Some of that came with getting a great job, where I'm thinking, okay, if I can qualify for this extremely competitive job, I must have something to offer to society.
What age were you when that broke through?
That was 29.
You were 29, so it was 2 years ago.
That was about 2 years
recently.
ago. Maybe 28. So
okay.
yeah, 2 or 3 years ago was when I got away from trying to start my own business and got into a career, and I got compliments from management. I got compliments like, wow, you're really hardworking. Thank you for hustling hard. I felt like I don't have anything to fall back on. The only way I can differentiate myself from all these other people is to just try to outwork them. And I realized that that's appreciated in the business world. If you're willing to work really hard in America, there's still a lot of opportunity to better yourself.
It never ceases to amaze me how far a word of affirmation goes with a person. It takes 5 affirmations that are positive to negate the negative one that you got. And that's the one thing that we can give away to one another for free. And so right here and right now, I want to be the first to give you a positive affirmation as to what you've managed to overcome. And I know you're still struggling with. What is the one thing that you have found? Now, you're here in the Philippines, and I think that's a different story for a different day.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because we're already into this puppy for about 18 minutes. Okay. What's one thing, name one thing you felt a sense of, if there's anything, here in the Philippines?
I felt included.
You felt included.
I felt included.
You were no longer invisible?
No longer invisible.
Did you feel envy?
No.
Did you feel confused?
No.
You're still ruminating.
Still, to some extent, it's hard when you see these loving Filipino families, when you talk to them and top of mind for them is their familial relationships, and I simply can't relate to that.
Can you, as the Philippines, and I know you've only been here a short period of time, and it seems to me like you've progressed leaps and bounds in the short period of time that you've been here. Does it give you any kind of sense of hope that if you hang it out for the long haul, that possibly you could obtain what?
Yes, absolutely. Close relationships. I feel that I'm very easily able to build quality relationships here. People are very warm, very receptive. They're understanding. When you tell them about your baggage, they can often relate on some level, not exactly apples to apples, but a lot of people here have their own struggles. They've been through hard times. They've had parents or grandparents that have lived through the aftermath of great tragedy as far as the war goes. It's not this halcyon land where everything's perfect and everybody's just having a good time, leave it to Beaver style. There's real struggles in the lives of many people here, and it makes me feel like when I see them overcoming their struggles, managing to maintain a smile, a positive attitude, that I could do the same thing.
So I think what you're saying in a roundabout way is my interpretation is that you finally, the Philippines is possibly giving you, and if I'm wrong, feel free to correct me, but they're showing you the role model that you never had. You're showing that, yes, you can be accepted. You're not invisible. We all are going to look back on our past and have regrets. But there's going to be a time where that shame or that feeling of self-pity, which is a dangerous cycle to get into, and it's easy for us to fall into it. And like you said, that will lead you down the path of drugs or addiction or crime or whatever, just because your self-worth or your self-esteem is so low. But you now, I've got to figure, maybe you see a light at the end of the tunnel. You're no longer a shadow, but you're a person. You're not just a guy, you're a guy with a name. And you've got examples out here of people whose mother was an OFW and was absent. They've lived with their grandparents just like you. There's a lot of that out here. They grew up having not much and yet made the most of it. So I think that the Philippines just might be the cure for you as opposed to psychotherapy or any kind of
I've been to so many
drugs or
therapists.
anything. Have you?
I've been to quite a few therapists. What's more effective is a sense of community. In my experience, for my personal situation, I can't speak for your experience, but in my experience coming here, having a sense of community, having people check in on me, reach out to me, hey, we still on for breakfast? Hey, we still on for lunch? Hey, why don't you come meet me for dinner? Having that sense that you are part of something bigger than yourself, that it's not all viewed through an individualistic lens, has been so healing for me. To know that I've got people like yourself that I can talk to, some of your friends that have welcomed me with open arms, is so, what's the word I'm looking for? I have a lot of what I call life-affirming experiences here. Experiences that make me feel like I matter, like I'm part of something, like I'm included, like in spite of my challenging background, that I can overcome that. I see the beautiful life that you've been able to build, and I know that I can build something similar for myself.
Well, I think everybody watching this video is rooting for you. I know I am. And we're going to catch up at a later date and do a little follow-up with you and find out how you're doing and what's new. And I think this is an important video because we're not talking about dating girls. We're not talking about the best place to go eat. We're not talking about age gap. We're not talking about our budgets. We're not talking about the normal things that you kind of see on these channels. I like to see this from a younger person's perspective with a bit of an old soul. So I want to thank you for coming onto the channel today and sharing with me, for being so open and so candid. And I always give my guests the last word.
Yes, well, thank you so much for having me today, Paul. It's been a pleasure. I do want to plug my YouTube channel. You can find me at Eastern Dreamer. That's my YouTube channel. I talk a lot about psychology, expat psychology. I also talk about financial independence. That's the real key for a lot of younger guys. I know you're out there watching Paul's channel, that you see him living this lifestyle and you think, I'm decades away from a Social Security check. Am I going to have to wait it out over here until I attain that, or is there a more expedient path? And so, yeah, these two topics I think are very pressing, and those are the two ways in which I feel like I can speak best on. So yeah, check out my channel, and I thank you so much for having me today, Paul.
No problem. And I'll be sure to put a link to your channel in the description. And I like this because I am starting to get some younger viewers. And I love having somebody that they can turn to and maybe relate to better than Grandpa Paul here. All right, kids, we'll see you guys in the next video.